In the meantime, for more on this, let's go to Dr. Dori Gold, a former Israeli ambassador to the United States and a former foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister we just heard from, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Gold is now the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Sir, let me start by getting your reaction to what Mr. Netanyahu said and your reaction to what Mr. Kerry said.
Well, frankly, Secretary Kerry's speech was billed as a way forward, as how to move the peace process into a positive direction. And much of the world has been thinking about that question for a while now. But frankly, what came out from Secretary Kerry was no clear path of how to do that. There are principles that Israel could never agree with, like returning to the 67 lines, setting the stage for the redivision of Jerusalem. That is not going to happen. But for example, the UN Security Council resolution, which Secretary Kerry ordered the U.S. to abstain on and let it go through, that resolution reinforced internationalization of the conflict, addressing the hard issues at the UN instead of at the negotiating table. And Secretary Kerry didn't explain how he's going to remedy what he created with that resolution.
Well, it's interesting, Secretary Kerry today, and I was struck by this, he seemed to paint Israel's plan as creating more settlements in order to push out Palestinians altogether to create just one state. Kerry says the U.S. is trying to prevent that and trying to just promote a two-state solution. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think this focus on settlements is almost an obsession. You know, Israel gave back 90% of the territories that it captured in a defensive war, the Six-Day War, when it returned the whole Sinai Peninsula. There were settlements in Sinai in the north and in the south, but that didn't stop Egypt and Israel from reaching peace. We had a whole issue of disengagement from the Gaza Strip. Israel withdrew all the settlements, all the settlers. We even withdrew the bodies of people who had been buried there. That didn't create peace. It set the stage for rocket attacks on the rest of Israel. So the real challenge is how you move peace forward, but you keep Israel secure. Prime Minister Netanyahu knows how to do that, and he'll insist on those conditions in any future negotiation. But Secretary Kerry seemed to be tearing away from Israel the kind of territorial buffers that the fathers of Israel's security, the architects of our national security doctrine, have always insisted upon Israel keeping.
You know,
we're not going back to the 67 lines.
He believes that this will help the peace process. Sounds like you believe it will hurt the U.S. peace process. Interesting that we, as in the United States, the Obama administration, issued some demands, which were pretty surprising. For Israel to acknowledge the suffering of the Palestinians, compensation for the Palestinians, to help Palestinians find new homes, and also, among other things, that any changes to the border must be agreed, and you just touched on this, but by both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, as well as an international body. Is it our place in the United States to tell Israel and the Palestinians what to do?
You know, years ago, I was invited to China, and I went to Beijing. And, you know, the Chinese don't always vote with us at the United Nations, but I asked them, how would you feel if people were dictating to you where the border should be in the South China Sea? How would you feel if the United Nations adopted resolutions saying your border should be here and not there? Of course, they all said, never. We would never agree to that. So I said, well, why do you support those Palestinian resolutions at the United Nations? Only Israel can decide how its security will be planned and will be implemented and, above all, safeguarded. And unfortunately, Secretary Kerry's speech veered away from that principle, trying to introduce the 67 lines and suggesting again the redivision of Jerusalem. More than 80% of the Israeli public opposed the line that Secretary Kerry put forward today.
All right, sir. We're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Dori Gold, thank you so much for joining us with your reaction to Secretary of State John Kerry's impassioned speech today. It seems like he got a little more worked up about Israel and Palestinians than he did about the issue of Syria, Iran, or North Korea, or just about anything else. Sir, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Okay. Well, in the meantime...